What happens when two of entertainment's most outspoken personalities collide on live television? When Blake Shelton walked onto the set of The View this morning, nobody expected the country music superstar to find himself in the middle of one of the most explosive confrontations daytime TV has seen in years. The Oklahoma native, known for his laid-back charm and quick wit, was supposed to be there for a lighthearted chat about his latest album and upcoming tours. Instead, what unfolded was a raw, unfiltered clash with co-host Whoopi Goldberg that had the studio audience gasping, producers scrambling, and social media erupting within minutes. Before we dive into exactly what was said and how this friendly interview turned into an all-out verbal showdown, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on, because trust me, you're going to have an opinion about this one. Blake settled into the couch with his signature relaxed posture, coffee mug in hand, flashing that familiar grin at the panel of hosts. The audience cheered as Joy Behar kicked things off with a softball question about his recent collaboration with a pop artist, something to ease into the conversation. Blake answered smoothly, talking about the creative process and how country music keeps evolving. The energy was light, the laughs were coming easy, and everything seemed perfectly on track for another typical celebrity. Interview segment. Then Whoopi leaned forward in her chair, her expression shifting from casual to serious in a heartbeat. She had that look she gets when she's about to steer the conversation somewhere deeper, somewhere most guests probably wish she wouldn't go. Blake noticed the change immediately. You could see it in the way his shoulders tensed just slightly, the way his smile became a little more fixed. Whoopi started by acknowledging his success, his years on television, his influence in the music industry. Blake nodded along, probably thinking this was building toward a compliment. But then she pivoted. She brought up comments he had made on social media a few weeks back, comments about the music industry's direction and what he perceived as a loss of authenticity in modern entertainment. Her tone wasn't accusatory exactly, but it wasn't friendly either. It was probing, challenging, the kind of tone that says, "I want you to explain yourself right now in front of millions of people." He set his coffee mug down on the table with a little more force than necessary. The other hosts exchanged glances. Sarah N. shifted in her seat. Sunny Hostin's eyebrows went up. This was not the direction anyone expected this interview to go, Whoopi continued, suggesting that his comments came across as dismissive of younger artists, that maybe he was out of touch with how the industry had evolved, how audiences had changed. She asked him directly if he thought his perspective was maybe a little too rooted in the past. If he was resistant to change because it threatened his relevance, the studio went quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, but the tense kind, where everyone's holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next. Blake stared at Whoopi for a long moment. He wasn't smiling anymore. His eyes had that sharp, focused look he gets when he's genuinely irritated. Not playing it up for laughs like he does on his reality show. This was real. He started his response slowly, deliberately, his Oklahoma drawl getting a little more pronounced the way it does when he's trying to keep his temper in check. He told Whoopi that she had misunderstood his comments entirely, that he wasn't dismissing anyone, that what he was actually talking about was the corporate homogenization of music, the way streaming algorithms and social media trends were replacing genuine artistry with manufactured viral moments. He said he wasn't against evolution. He was against the erasure of craftsmanship in favor of whatever gets the most clicks. Whoopi wasn't backing down. She interrupted him, which, if you know anything about Blake Shelton, is not something he takes kindly to. She said that sounded like exactly the kind of thing every generation says when they're getting older and don't understand what young people are doing. She brought up how rock and roll fans said the same thing about country music decades ago, how country purists said the same thing when he and his peers started blending genres. She asked him point blank if he saw the irony in his position. Blake's face flushed. He leaned forward, matching her posture, his voice getting louder. He told her there was no irony, that what she was describing was natural evolution within artistic boundaries. What he was criticizing was the complete abandonment of those boundaries. He said when he started out, you had to actually be able to sing, actually be able to play an instrument, actually be able to write a song that meant something. Now, he said, you just need a decent ring light and 15 seconds of something catchy. Joy tried to jump in, probably to lighten the mood, but Whoopi held up her hand. Her eyes locked on Blake. She told him that was elitist, that he was basically saying his era was better. His music was more legitimate, and everyone coming up now was doing it wrong. She said that kind of attitude was exactly what held the industry back, what made it harder for diverse voices to break through, what kept the same old gatekeepers in power. Blake shook his head, his frustration obvious now. He said she was twisting his words, putting meanings into his mouth that he never intended. He said he had mentored dozens of young artists, that he had consistently championed new talent, that his whole point was about the industry machinery, not the artists themselves. But Whoopi wasn't letting him off that easy. She fired back that his actions didn't matter if his public statements sent a different message, that whether he intended it or not, his comments reinforced the idea that there was a right way and a wrong way to make music, and he got to decide which was which. The tension in the studio was suffocating at this point. Audience members were looking at each other, unsure if they should clap, boo, or just sit there in shocked silence. The producers in the control room were probably having heart attacks trying to figure out if they should cut to commercial. But the two of them just kept going, both convinced they were right, both refusing to give an inch. Blake's voice took on an edge as he told Whoopi that she was making this about something it wasn't, that she was trying to paint him as some out-of-touch dinosaur when all he was doing was advocating for quality over quantity, substance over spectacle. He said if that made him elitist, then fine. He'd wear that label, because someone needed to say it. He said the reason music felt so disposable now was because it was treated as disposable, created to be consumed and forgotten in a matter of days. And that wasn't evolution. That was degradation. Whoopi shot back that his definition of quality was subjective, that what he valued in music wasn't universal, that different generations and different cultures had different relationships with art and entertainment. She said music had always been tied to technology, that every technological shift brought the same complaints from the previous generation, and they were always wrong. She told him the only thing that was degrading was his ability to appreciate anything that didn't fit his narrow definition of what music should be. That's when Blake really lost it. Not in a violent way, not even in a yelling way exactly, but you could see something snap behind his eyes. His whole demeanor changed. He sat back in his chair, let out a bitter laugh, and said something that would become the most replayed moment of the entire exchange. He looked directly at Whoopi and told her that, for someone who built a career on speaking truth to power, she had gotten awfully comfortable being the power, deciding what opinions were acceptable, shutting down anyone who disagreed with the current narrative. The other hosts froze. Sonny's mouth literally fell open. Alyssa looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Sarah was staring at the table. Joy's eyes were wide as saucers, and Whoopi just stared at Blake with an expression that was impossible to read, somewhere between fury and respect, like she couldn't believe he had just said that, but also couldn't deny there might be a grain of truth in it. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. The silence stretched out, painful and heavy. Then Whoopi spoke, and her voice was cold, controlled, more dangerous than if she had yelled. She told Blake that was a hell of an accusation to make, especially from someone who had spent years as a judge on a television show that literally existed to decide who was talented enough to deserve a career and who wasn't. She said he had been the gatekeeper, the person with the power to shape careers and crush dreams with a single comment. So maybe he should think real hard about whether he was projecting his own guilt onto her. Blake's face went from red to almost purple. He started to respond, his mouth opening, words forming. And that's when we hit the moment that nobody saw coming. The escalation that took this from a heated debate to something else entirely. But you'll have to wait for the next part to find out exactly what Blake said that made Whoopi stand up from the table. Blake's hands gripped the armrest of the couch, his knuckles white. He looked at Whoopi with an intensity that made it clear he wasn't about to let that comment slide. He told her that being a judge on a singing competition was nothing like what she was doing right now, that his job was to evaluate vocal talent and performance ability, things that could be objectively measured, not to police what people were allowed to think or say about the state of their own industry. He said when he gave criticism on that show, it was constructive, it was specific, it was meant to help people improve, not shut them down for having the wrong opinion. Whoopi's eyes narrowed. She asked him if he really believed that, if he honestly thought there was no subjectivity in his judgments, no personal bias in deciding which voices deserved to be heard. She reminded him of specific contestants over the years, bringing up moments where his critiques had been harsh, where people accused him of favoritism, where his preferences clearly influenced his decisions. She said the only difference between them was that she owned her perspective. She didn't hide behind claims of objectivity. Blake leaned forward again, his voice rising. He said there was a massive difference between having preferences and actively trying to control the conversation, between critiquing a performance and attacking someone's character for expressing an opinion. He told her that what she was doing right now was exactly the problem, taking a discussion about music and the industry and turning it into a personal attack, making it about him as a person rather than the actual issues he was trying to address. Whoopi's response was swift and cutting. She said if he felt attacked, maybe that was because his position was indefensible. That sometimes when people pushed back on bad takes, it felt personal because the takes were revealing something about the person making them. She said she wasn't attacking his character, she was challenging his logic. And if he couldn't handle that without getting defensive and throwing accusations around, maybe he wasn't as open-minded as he claimed to be. The audience was completely silent now. A few people looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others were leaning forward, transfixed. This had gone so far beyond a normal talk show disagreement that nobody knew what to do. Sonny tried to interject, suggesting they take a breath and reset the conversation. But both Blake and Whoopi ignored her completely. They were locked in now, neither willing to back down, neither willing to let the other have the last word. Blake's voice took on a sharp, sarcastic edge. He said it was fascinating how challenging his logic apparently required misrepresenting everything he said, putting words in his mouth and then acting like she had scored some kind of point by arguing against positions he never took. He told her that wasn't debate, that was manipulation, and the fact that she was so practiced at it probably said a lot about how these conversations usually went on this show. Whoopi stood up, not quickly, not dramatically, but deliberately, her chair scraping against the floor. The other hosts looked panicked. Joy reached out like she was going to grab Whoopi's arm, but thought better of it. Whoopi stood there behind the table, looking down at Blake, and the power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. She wasn't yelling. It wasn't gesturing wildly. She was just standing. And somehow that was more intimidating than anything else she could have done. She told Blake that he had come onto her show as a guest and turned what should have been a pleasant conversation into an opportunity to insult her, insult the show, and play victim when he got called out. She said if anyone was manipulating this situation, it was him, coming in with a chip on his shoulder, looking for a fight, and then acting shocked when someone fought back. She said he could dish it out all day long on social media, on his own platforms where everyone agreed with him, but the second someone with a different perspective pushed back, he couldn't handle it. Blake stood up too, matching her energy. He said he didn't come looking for a fight, that she was the one who brought up his social media comments. She was the one who turned this confrontational. She was the one who decided to make this interview about politics and perspective instead of music. He said if she wanted to have a real conversation about the industry, he was all for it, but what she wanted was to grandstand, to make him look bad in front of her audience. To score points for her side, whatever that side was, Whoopi's voice went up for the first time. She said his side, her side, that was exactly the problem with his whole worldview. This idea that everything was teams and tribes, and us versus them. She said music wasn't supposed to be about sides. Art wasn't supposed to be about sides. But he was the one who made it that way by deciding there were real artists and fake artists, authentic music and manufactured garbage, people who got it and people who didn't. She said he created the division and then got mad when people pointed it out. Blake fired back immediately. He said she was doing the exact same thing, just from a different angle, deciding that anyone who questioned the current state of the industry was an elitist, a gatekeeper, someone stuck in the past. He said she had just as much of an us versus them mentality. She just thought her us was morally superior. He told her the difference was that he was criticizing a system, a corporate structure, while she was making it personal, attacking him as an individual for daring to have an opinion she disagreed with. The producers must have been screaming in someone's earpiece at this point because Sonny made another attempt to interrupt. Her voice strained as she suggested they were all passionate about music and maybe they could find common ground. But it was like throwing a pebble at a freight train. Neither Blake nor Whoopi even acknowledged she had spoken. Whoopi told Blake that everything was personal, that his criticism of the system was criticism of the people trying to succeed in that system, the artists trying to make a living, the young people trying to find their voice. She said he couldn't separate the two, couldn't hide behind this idea that he was just concerned about quality, when what he was really concerned about was his own relevance in an industry that was moving on without him. That hit a nerve. Blake's face changed, the anger mixing with something else, something that looked almost like hurt. He told her that was a low blow, that she didn't know anything about his relationship with younger artists, about the time and energy he put into helping people build careers, about the genuine concern he had for what was happening to an art form he loved. He said accusing him of being threatened or jealous was cheap. It was the kind of easy insult people threw around when they didn't have a real argument. Whoopi wasn't backing off. She said if it was such a cheap insult, why did it bother him so much? Why was that the thing that finally got under his skin? She said maybe it hit close to home. Maybe there was truth in it that he didn't want to face. She told him that every generation of artists had to deal with the generation before them, saying everything was better back in their day, and every single time the older generation was wrong. They were just scared of becoming irrelevant. Blake's voice went quiet, which somehow made it more intense. He told her she could think whatever she wanted about his motivations. She could psychoanalyze him all day long, but it didn't change the fundamental point he was making. He said the industry had prioritized profit over artistry, virality over substance. And if nobody was willing to say that out loud because they were afraid of being called old or out of touch, then the problem was only going to get worse. He said someone had to be willing to be the bad guy, to say the uncomfortable truth, even if it meant getting torn apart by people like her. Whoopi laughed, but there was no humor in it. She said the uncomfortable truth, like he was some kind of martyr for speaking his mind on Twitter. She told him the uncomfortable truth was that the industry had always been about profit, that it had always been a business, that the golden age he was romanticizing never actually existed the way he remembered it. She said he was nostalgia tripping, confusing his personal experience with objective reality, and trying to force everyone else to validate his memory. Blake shook his head, his frustration reaching a peak. He said she wasn't listening, that she had decided what he believed before he even opened his mouth, and nothing he said was going to change her mind, because she wasn't interested in understanding his perspective. She was interested in being right. He told her that was the real problem, not the music industry, not generational differences, but the complete inability of people to have a conversation without trying to destroy each other. Whoopi spread her hands, her expression challenging. She said she was right here, having a conversation with him, engaging with every point he made. And the reason it felt like destruction was because his points didn't hold up under scrutiny. She said if his ideas were solid, if his arguments were sound, he wouldn't need to complain about how she was responding. He would just respond better. The other hosts had given up trying to moderate at this point. They were just sitting there, watching this unfold like everyone else. Alyssa looked like she was trying to telepathically communicate with the control room. Joy was covering her mouth with her hand. Sarah had her arms crossed, eyes darting between Blake and Whoopi. And Sunny just looked exhausted, like she had aged 10 years in the last 15 minutes. The silence that followed was suffocating. Blake and Whoopi stood facing each other across the table, both breathing hard. Finally, Whoopi sat down. Blake remained standing for a moment before lowering himself back onto the couch. "We need to go to commercial," Sunny said quietly. "No," Whoopi said flatly. "We're finishing this conversation." Blake let out a bitter laugh. "Conversation? Is that what you're calling this?" "What would you call it?" Whoopi shot back. "A public execution," Blake said. "You ambushed me with my social media posts and twisted everything I said." "Nobody twisted anything," Whoopi replied. "Your words are your words." Blake started removing his microphone. "This interview is over." "We're in the middle of the show," Alyssa protested. "Then you'll have plenty to talk about after I leave," Blake replied. He grabbed his jacket and walked off stage, leaving the 5 hosts in stunned silence. 3 hours later, Blake sat in Bill Maher's green room, still processing what happened. His phone was exploding with notifications. #BlakeVisWhoopi was trending everywhere. Bill Maher walked in personally. "Thanks for coming on. I saw what happened. We're going to have a real conversation tonight, but I'm going to push back on some of your points. Is that okay?" "Yeah, That's okay, Blake said. Soon he was on stage. Bill didn't waste time. Blake, you had quite the day on The View. What happened? I went on expecting to promote my album and got interrogated about my social media posts instead. It got heated and I left. Bill leaned forward. But you gave as good as you got. You weren't exactly passive. I was defending myself, Blake said. Let's talk about the actual point, Bill said. You think music has become too manufactured. But here's where you lose people. You're acting like there was some golden age where music wasn't commercial. And that just wasn't true. Blake felt his frustration building. But there used to be more room for artistry within that business. Who gets to decide what's essential? Bill countered. When you say if you need 100 writers, you're not a musician that carries weight. Young artists hear that and feel illegitimate. Blake was quiet. This was the second time today someone made this point. The political commentator on the panel nodded. Every generation thinks the next is doing it wrong. Rock said it about disco, disco about hip-hop. It's a tale as old as time. So I'm just the old guy yelling at clouds? Blake asked bitterly. No, Bill said. But you need to express your concerns without sounding like you're delegitimizing everyone who came after you. Stop positioning yourself as the defender of real music. That's where people call you out. Blake felt cornered. So what am I supposed to do? Just accept everything. Critique away, Bill said, but do it with humility. Acknowledge your perspective is just one among many. After the show, Bill came over. Stop trying to win this argument. You're not going to win it. Find a way to talk about your concerns that doesn't alienate everyone who disagrees. Blake nodded slowly. I need to think about all this. That would be good, Bill said, and stay off Twitter for a while. Driving home through LA traffic, Blake's mind replayed both conversations. Were they right? Was he just uncomfortable with change, dressing up his discomfort as principle? The next morning, headlines were everywhere. Blake Shelton storms off The View after a heated exchange. Country star can't handle real time with Bill Maher either. Blake Shelton's bad day to talk shows. 2 meltdowns his manager called, "We need damage control." A statement that clarifies no, Blake said. Let it go. I'm done with this. The media circus. The arguments. I'm done. Blake, you've got an album coming out. The album will be fine. Or it won't. Either way, I'm not doing this anymore. His wife sat across from him at breakfast. So, I think I messed up, Blake admitted. You did, she agreed. But it's not unfixable. I don't want to fix it. I just want to move on. Over the next days, the story faded. Blake kept his word. He stayed off social media, turned down interviews, focused on music and family. His album came out and did well enough. Some called it authentic. Others called it dated. Blake tried not to read reviews. When asked about the music industry in interviews, Blake gave his most honest answer. I believe in music that moves people. However it's made, whoever makes it, if it connects with someone, if it means something, then it's real. The rest is just details. It wasn't the answer his younger self would have given. But it was true, and truth Blake had learned the hard way was more important than being right.